Welcome to ISO 20022 Made Simple, a special podcast series brought to you by Standard Chartered's Corporate and Investment Bank. I'm Danielle Sharp, the Global Head of FI Clearing Products in Cash Management. This is our third episode in the series. Over the first two episodes, we've touched on ISO 20022 in the context of compliance, and more recently on richer data and AI for the journey ahead. In today's episode, we are diving into the moving parts of the CBPR Plus migration, the journey from March 2023 to now, and clarity around what is required ahead of November 2025, but also what's still yet to come. We'll talk on industry challenges and opportunities, and we'll cover some of the key migration considerations as banks continue to get ready and embrace this change. To help us unpack this topic, I am very pleased to be joined by Girish Raju, our ISO 20022 SME, representing Standard Chartered in various industry working groups, and a very special guest, Nicolas Stuckens, who joins us from Swift as the head of ISO 20022 adoption program. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you, Danielle.
Good, Danielle.
Okay, let's jump into it. Nicolas, there's been a lot happening since March 2023, and there's still plenty more to come. So to ensure we're all on the same page from the outset, maybe you could walk us through who is impacted, what we're referring to in the context of mandatory migration, and maybe a little bit around which messages are changing when, which empty messages are staying put, or at least for now.
Yes, so let me start by explaining who's impacted currently. The scope of the institutions that need to adopt ISO 20022 is what we call the financial institutions. So every payment, every instruction from financial institution to financial institution must migrate to ISO 20022. In Swift user category term, we call these SUPE and NOSU, like supervised and non-supervised entities, just to be fully accurate. The scope of what needs to be migrated is very broad. What we describe as CBPR Plus, so cross-border payments reporting messages, ranges from payment initiation messages, payment instructions, but also cancellation statement, reporting messages, ENI messages. So it's a very broad set of messages that need to migrate from the FIN legacy format to the ISO 20022 equivalent. And the initial plan was for this entire scope of messages to migrate to their ISO equivalent by November 2025. Now, as bank engaged in the migration process, they realized that it was more complex than it first appeared, and probably the goalpost was a bit ambitious. So mid 2024, we asked the community to actually focus on payment instructions first, and that really becomes the new objective for now, is that every payment instructions must migrate to their ISO equivalent by November 2025, and therefore we have by default extended the coexistence period for all of the other messages. And the reason we did that was really that payment instructions are key to ensure the integrity of the payment chain, because they travel across many different stakeholders across the payment chain. So it becomes very difficult to maintain integrity of data when you have either participants or payment clearing systems that are using different formats, and you need to convert the data back and forth. So the goal is really to migrate everyone onto ISO 20022 for payment instructions, so that you have that end-to-end chain of payments in the same format.
Makes complete sense. And so I guess staying on that topic around the migration for payment instructions that we're navigating through today, I realize that we're sat here in May 2025 at the point of recording. What are you seeing across the journey, the migration journey? Are you seeing similar progress across institutions globally? Maybe we start there.
Yeah, so it effectively started in March 23. And we saw, overnight, a number of institutions switch their volume to ISO 20022 at the very early stage of the coexistence period. I think we started with 15%, if I remember correctly. Today we are at 40%. So there's been an increase. You could call it substantial, but it's been 2 years out of the 2.5-year migration program. So obviously the biggest chunk of conversion still needs to come. We are obviously engaging with the community to assess the confidence in achieving that November 2025 deadline. And all of the major players that we engage with have confirmed that they are committed to end the coexistence in November 2025. So we expect strong growth in the coming quarter. I think at the end of this quarter, we expect to see 50% of the messages and then 70% somewhere in September. And then leading up to, I think so far we predict up to 90% of messages by November. We can't predict the forecast and the growth, the switchover for everyone, just because we can't speak to everyone. So there is a portion for which we have no information, but the general feedback we get from the community is that they still feel very confident and on track to achieve that migration. We've also seen strong adoption in most of the markets where domestic clearing has already moved to ISO 20022. So typically where you've got the major trading currencies like the euro, sterling, the dollar, obviously Singapore, Japan, Australia, South Africa, and so on. A lot of these countries are relatively high and very advanced in their ISO adoption. Some countries, though, are still very, very low in terms of adoption. But the coexistence period is not over yet. So there is still 6 months to go, and some of these banks may still switch over in the next 6 months. Now, in terms of what we see, in terms of traffic and the formatting we see, I think it's fair to say that so far, most of the payments instructions that we see in ISO 20022 are very much what we call like for like. So they are similar to a fin payment instructions in terms of the content, but they're in a different format. And within that, we see two different categories. We see the banks that have gone for a native implementation. So the messages are really well structured according to the ISO structure. And so every element is really in the right place. And then we see some banks that have used translation tools. And so obviously when you use translation tool, you may encounter some data mapping issues and you see bits and pieces like the end of the name might end up in the address field and this type of things. Or you see some of the fin codes appearing in the ISO messages, which obviously is not ideal. But I think what we hear from the banks is most of them have an approach where they first want to be on ISO rails, and then they will work on, working on the structure and making the data richer in a sort of second phase.
Thank you. You answered some of the questions I was going to follow up with around, given that we've only got 6 months to go and 60% left to migrate, what is the sense and the general progression that you're expecting? And so again, I think it's great to know that Swift are engaging so many of the top banks, and we are positive at this point in time that we'll start to meet some of the expectations and the targets before November. I think really interesting points as well around the formatting and the differences between native and converter usage, and interesting to know that the vast majority, I think you're saying, is looking as though it's becoming more of a like for like traffic and consumption. Girish, maybe let me turn to you on this as well in the context of Standard Chartered, and Nicolas has just spoken about the difference in structure and from a native point of view to a translation tool point of view. What are we seeing at Standard Chartered, particularly in our role as an intermediary?
And Daniel, for just extending what Nicolas said, for the first quarter this year from the statistics that we have, over 45% of our interbank volumes where SEB acts as an intermediary agent is already on ISO XML. So our conversion rate for the same quarter is a little better than the industry benchmark, so to say. Now, as for ramping up of the volumes are concerned, considering we only have 6 months left, we have taken two different approaches for November 25. The first approach is what Nicolas also highlighted. For majority of the markets or the critical markets covering more than 90% of the cross-border volumes, we are upgrading our systems to handle payment instructions in the native format from an end-to-end perspective. So there won't be any chances of data drop or a data truncation. As we migrate more and more countries into this native format, our MX conversion rate will also improve significantly on a month-on-month basis. Yeah, that's the approach number one. For the approach number two, for non-critical markets with less than 10% of the cross-border volumes, we plan to adopt the contingency measures by using Swift's in-house translator library, which can convert an MT to an MX. So this will be a like-for-like conversion with some element of data risk and data truncation and data drop and so on and so forth. But again, this is a temporary solution just to meet the readiness for November 25. But having said, our goal is really to reach 100% compliance on or before 22nd November 2025.
Excellent, and yeah, great to know that we're trending above average, let's say, compared to the Swift traffic, which is great. And maybe just staying with you for a second here, Girish, as well, just in terms of the clients that we're supporting as well. Are you seeing kind of differences in readiness through some of the questions that are coming through with clients, through some of the payments that perhaps are falling into certain challenges along the way? I guess I'm interested in some of your perspectives around what we're seeing from our client base as well.
So I mean, in the initial stage of this program, of course, it throws several challenges than the opportunities. Certainly, when a program of this size spans over 2 to 3 years or even longer. So banks like us, particularly who are in the midst of this program, are also at the same time going through payments platform modernization with a focus on decommissioning the legacy. They also want to optimize the cost. Additionally, there are also overlapping initiatives such as the HVPS Plus migration with the regulatory mandate and so on and so forth. So in that context, the challenges basically are managing 2 or more systems during the transition phase is a kind of a barrier for banks like SEB and similarly for other banks as well. And of course, this varying adoption timeline between CBPR Plus and HVPS Plus poses several challenges in terms of the resource allocation, budgeting, business prioritization, and so on and so forth. Very importantly, client experience may be impacted as well, especially the multi-marketed clients where banks have differential capabilities, i.e. in some markets we are fully native, in some markets we are an MT or proprietary format when it comes to RTGS readiness. There will always be an interoperability challenges during the transition phase between cross-border leg versus domestic. Challenges of dealing with the travel rules, data truncation, data loss, operation overhead, dealing with RFIs in this period of coexistence. There is a potential increase in number of false hits, alarms when it comes to sanction screening, driven by poor data quality, which will also have direct, indirect implication on the clients because of delayed settlement. And there will also be issue with regard to data mapping between the proprietary formats, MT versus MX, because we support all sorts of formats front to bank. Additionally, when it comes to testing, it will become a major puzzle for us, including our clients, because of multiple or parallel and ongoing activity. So when it comes to challenges, certainly the list will go on and on. But at the same time, if you talk about the opportunities and the benefits for us and for our clients, we all know that ISO offers a clear segregation of messages for rejects, returns, transaction status reports, and so on and so forth, which some of which Nicolas also highlighted. So there will be a clear segregation of message by the underlying use cases. And ISO also have dedicated placeholders for purpose of payments, regulated reporting, which helps with higher STP rates for regulated markets. This will be a win-win for both for us, for the banks, as well as for our clients. We also notice clear benefits from using Case Manager, which will significantly reduce efforts for operations back office people, because they spend anywhere around 5 to 10 minutes logging a case, investigating, and so on and so forth. Now with the usage of Client Case Manager, we can simplify and then automate most of these standardized use cases. I think there are more than 10 use cases so far. Additionally, we also expect efficiency gains in terms of screening and fraud management, leading to a frictionless payments journey and experience for our clients. When this whole CBPR plus kind of matures in over a period of 2 to 3 years. This is what I believe, Daniel.
No, that's really good perspectives. I think you're right. With any migration comes a challenge, many challenges, in fact, but at the same time, I think we're all very much aware of the benefits and the efficiency gains that can come with this. And I think, this is partially why I asked some of the questions around the practical learnings that we've had along the way, because I'm sure many of our clients, many other banks are still, partway through their migration, as are we. And so those practical learnings, whilst we do face challenges, are as important, in terms of how we navigate that between now and the November timeline and beyond as well. So maybe actually I'll come to Nicolas at this point, because I'm sure you have a lot of perspectives on this and have heard from many other banks around some of the challenges they've encountered, as well as the learnings that they've managed to take and adopt, and perhaps reiterate the ways in which they are doing things. So whilst no doubt major change, I think we can all comfortably say that that's the case. What do you believe some of the key migration considerations that you've seen banks benefit from, or perhaps some of the ways in which banks have voiced their challenges and maybe Swift have supported or guided or provided toolkits to help banks on that journey?
Yeah, certainly. I think it would be wrong to think that the ISO adoption, or to see that as a traditional standards release, or merely as a software upgrade of payment system. I think it's key to understand that this is a front-to-back transformation of all of the payments flows and processes across the bank. So it really goes deep, and I think it needs to be carefully thought through. And I think that the banks that we've seen being most successful really have started their journey a long time ago. They have taken the time to build a very clear plan. It requires to have an in-depth learning and in-depth understanding of ISO 20022, starting with an initial assessment of their current, organization, infrastructure, processes, and so on. Identify the gaps with what you have today and where you want to be. Understand the dependencies, technical, vendor, people, processes, systems, and so on. Obviously, you need to budget. Key for that, you need to set up a project plan, and then comes a long period of technical implementation, testing, building a migration plan, engaging with your clients, engaging with your counterparts, make sure that everyone understands the change, and then go live. And even when you go live, then there's a lot of teething issues that may appear here and there. We've seen formatting issues. We've seen some interoperability issues, and people sometimes need to roll back and then adjust and reactivate. So it's a very long process. But I think the banks that have really best navigated this change really understood that it is complex, it requires time. But also, as Girish pointed out, they also understood that this is an opportunity to optimize some of the legacy that no doubt banks have built over the years. And yes, we do provide a wealth of resource to support the industry. We provide a lot of training material. Obviously, we provide a lot of capabilities that banks are leveraging as well in terms of translation tools. My Standards is a fantastic tool in terms of providing resources and the ability to understand how the usage guideline from one payment market infrastructure is aligned or not with the CBPR Plus format and so on. We provide a test sparring partner. We provide an ISO 20022 readiness directory. There is a readiness portal. And obviously, we have a lot of standards experts and a lot of technical experts who can help the banks in their adoption journey. We also provide a typical project plan for organizations that need to start and and really need to understand all of the depth and how to navigate the complexity of that change.
Great. So lots of tools out there. So if there are any banks listening that are still navigating or still trying to work out, perhaps some of the gaps in their migration plan, then I think it sounds as though there's plenty of available sources of information and documents and people, I'm sure, on hand as well from Swift to support. Excellent. Thanks, Nicolas. And look, and I think Girish, again, Standard Chartered, we are one of the banks that have been on this journey for a while, and of course we've had migration plans in place and touched on many of the things that Nicolas just spoke to, from vendors to various systems to testing, and also leveraging the tools that Swift makes available to us. So maybe I'll ask a question around some of the day-to-day practicalities and maybe just making this slightly more real for our listeners as well. So beyond some of the format changes, and we know that, of course, that presents day-to-day challenges, we also know that there's changes that are triggered across multiple systems. Nicolas said earlier, it's a front-to-back transformation. So this isn't just a transaction processing system change. And of course, operations teams are impacted, client relationships and the way in which we, of course, ask them to send us payment instructions, or even some of the channels that they engage us through if they're not Swift are impacted as well. Maybe you could spend just a few minutes kind of helping us understand a little bit about how Standard Chartered have navigated across some of these things, not just the challenges, but maybe some of the opportunities that you've observed, whether it's through some of the client education pieces, maybe it's also through looking how all of the systems interlink and how we carry data between them. Maybe you could give us just a couple of insights around how we've been managing some of that on a practical level.
Yeah, sure, Daniel. So, see, my view is, since every bank system and strategies are different, there is no one best approach to implement ISO, right? So, however, if I have to pick some of the best practices, lessons learned from what we know since for the last 2 years of CBPR migration program, is very importantly for us is to have a pan-bank-wide program governance, with focus on organizational planning across all lines of business. It should not just be limited to cash or retail, but really across all lines of business. Second one is to establish clear communication strategy, knowledge amplification, both internally as well as externally. We have done quite a lot when it comes to external client engagement, be it FI clients or corporates, since last 2 years. We have to also engage technology and operations intensively because of front-to-back architectural changes that are required, and of course changes to the operation procedures in relation to ISO. Very importantly, because there will be some element of impact to the client, not every client, but depending on the use cases, there is a necessity to set up a client-facing help desk or a team for managing client expectations are really key. I think the second biggest theme would be around kind of data strategy to understand whether we understand the new language, because this has been there, although this has been there for a very long time. This is relatively new when it comes to cross-border and for RTGS payments. Understand the key capabilities, the possibilities that ISO offers. Understand the key benefits for our clients, importantly, and of course, for banks' own internal functions such as tuning up the STP rates, better data analytics, enriched screening and fraud management, FATF control, and so on and so forth. And perhaps the next biggest theme, I would say, is for banks to figure out what sort of transition strategy they need to adopt, whether to buy the platform or buy the product from off the shelf from vendors, or to build their own capability, or even to enhance one of the legacy existing systems, or to adopt contingency measures with converter approach. So in the end, what I want to say is it is important for banks to set the success criteria for both receiving as well as forwarding and being able to initiate and leverage rich data end to end, right? So additionally, of course, one of the topic Nicolas highlighted is the post-implementation challenges. It's not just enough to deliver something into production, because the challenges will come only be known only after when you see the first business traffic in the production or the live environment. So it's very much essential for banks like us to establish a dedicated command center, effectively manage, post-production incidents, problem management, keeping our frontline teams informed of the upcoming activities, engaging clients and minimizing, potential delays in settlement, of course. And also it requires for us to do some level of testing directly with the client, whether it's a POC, whether it is a penny testing, you name it, so that there are no new surprises post go live, because ISO, in my view, is a very complex topic to start with.
Yeah, very, very well put. And Nicolas, actually, just whilst we're talking about this, is there anything you'd add? What do you think? Covered that relatively comprehensively there.
Well, actually, I should ask Girish to speak more on the benefits of ISO, because clearly that question comes a lot, and I'm still a bit surprised at this stage in the program, when people ask about all of the benefits of ISO. But yes, there is a lot of benefits to unpack for the industry there, and Girish spoke about that, but. Benefits for banks is increased interoperability across all the systems. No need to remap all of the data. There will be less repairs. Financial crime should be more efficient. You should experience less false positive when you use structured data. There will be improved E&I in the future as well. But then obviously there's a lot of benefits for clients because these payments will go faster. Obviously, they will at some stage become cheaper as well. There will be enhanced predictability, transparency, tracking capabilities made available to clients. And I think corporate customers tend to gain a lot from this migration. So with richer and structured data, it will be easier to enable automation and reconciliation. Provide better cash management to corporate customers, better forecasting and so on. So I think it's really up to the bank, but there's an opportunity there to provide fantastic new capabilities and services to clients to really leverage the value proposition that ISO brings.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. And, the point that you mentioned about, at this stage of the journey, talking about those benefits, sometimes it feels a little bit too late to be asking. But I think, my view here for a moment is, I think we're all pretty aware of what the benefits and, the opportunities are. And I think it comes back to your point at the beginning, which was we can't look at this as a system change. We can't look at this as a technological migration. There is so much more to it. And so, I guess as part of that migration journey, I think some of the absolutely critical points are that, yes, of course, there's a whole piece around making sure that everything's working and that, we're ready come November 2025. And of course, through the various other message migrations post that. But at the same time, thinking about some of the added value that could come if we did certain things in certain ways. And whether that's, even just looking at how we might be able to offer enhanced customer service or enhanced product offerings along the way. I think, that's as much of a critical need rather than it just being entirely focused on how do we reach the end line. But I realise that there's some practicalities in that as well. And so it's not as straightforward and as easy as being able to dream big from the outset. But I do think, and I hope that you are starting to see more and more banks starting to think a little bit more along those lines as we're getting closer and closer to the November deadline.
Certainly, we do, but I think what is key is also to realize that all of this takes time, right? Not just because you're on ISO doesn't mean that all of this is materializing day one, because there's still a dependency on the quality of the data, and obviously you're not alone. There is a dependency on counterparts there as well. So it will all of this is going to be possible, but it will take time.
Absolutely. Funnily enough, we spoke about that on our last episode, actually, with with one of our colleagues from the AI team, and Eleanor essentially said very similar. It's going to take time for us to understand the data, to be able to use the data in the right way. But fundamentally, if we set ourselves up with the right intentions, then at least the availability of using that later becomes more prominent. Girish, I'm going to ask you a question that's a little bit more geared to banks that are maybe further behind on the journey. So I know at the beginning of today's episode, Nicolas said that there's certain markets that are much further behind in their adoption rate. I'm sure, Girish, in your conversations with banks, we've found that some banks are far more advanced than others around our footprint. So in your view, what would be the absolute must-do next steps that banks who are further behind on the journey must think about now to avoid being caught out in that final stretch?
So in that aspect, Daniel, see, the coexistence is already a reality. As Nicolas said, we're expecting 50% of the cross-border volumes already on the ISO rails, end of this quarter. And large banks like us are already in the middle or the tail end of the migration program. Luckily, what has happened is for November 25, the scope is kind of reduced to the core payment messages only, i.e. the PAX 8 and the PAX 9 kind of messages. Yeah. And now considering November 2025 is not that far away, my advice basically, this is our own experience, is whatever is their business goal, they should start making ISO 2022 as part of their strategy. Number two is to start engaging their vendors, because I know, speaking to communities in India, they were all expecting an upgrade in the versions in the month of June, July, or to their tech partners to explore their readiness. They can still go native if they can and minimize the risk of data risk and data drop and the number of RFIs and hold it for their own operations colleagues, or plan for the contingencies. Of course, Swift has several options, to have the translator, whether it is in-house or in-flight at a cost. But banks should also heavily focus on channel readiness for client to support emerging use cases which requires data in certain format. Specifically, I'm calling out the payment instructions with OBO. There will be a certain impact to our clients. And of course, educate clients on the impact and then reach out to clients, do the client training, make sure that they understand and able to output the rich data as of November 2025. And banks can also start to identify areas of improvement which can bring benefits to their own organization, some of which I highlighted in the previous question as well. So I really believe that the time for such action is now, and banks should act swiftly if they are to comply with the CBPR guidelines by 22nd November 2025.
Excellent. Thanks, Girish. Nicolas, what's Swift's advice? Anything additional you'd add on there to ensure that banks around the world are not going to encounter operational risk come November?
Yes, certainly. And I think Girish mentioned already a few times, he mentioned the word contingency processing. So maybe I need to be a bit more clear about what this means here. So what's really going to happen on the 22nd of November or during that weekend is, as we roll out Standards Release 2025, is that we are going to end the coexistence between the ISO 2022 payments format and the FIN legacy format. So that means that there will be no more FIN FI to FI payments exchanged on the network. So as a bank being fully ready for ISO 2022, you will not receive any FIN payments anymore. But there might be few banks that are not capable of sending these messages, as we discussed before. Some of them are probably still behind in their planning. So we are going to roll out a contingency processing capability. So that means that banks who are not in a position to send a payment in ISO format may continue to send the payment in FIN format, and then Swift will apply contingency processing, which is to convert that payment in the ISO equivalent and deliver that payment as an ISO payment to the recipient. Now, to do that, obviously, we need to make sure we can convert that message. So we are rolling out additional FIN validation rules, because sometimes, data is required in an ISO message, which is not mandatory in a FIN payment. So if it's not present, obviously, we can't invent it. We can't convert a message in a number of cases. So there are additional FIN validation rules which will apply. And so if banks want to leverage that capability, then they need to ensure that their current FIN traffic will adhere to these additional FIN validation. So there's a need to perhaps reinvest into FIN flows, which is a bit of a throwaway, but sometimes might be necessary if you really want to make sure that your payment will get through. Otherwise, there is a risk that some of your payment will be nagged or aborted. So it is really key to test in that respect. The validation rules are already published for a number of months. They are available on our website. And as of July 2020, as of July this year, we are rolling out standard release 2025 in a pilot future environment, and banks will be able to test this contingency processing capability. So that would be my key advice: is if you know that you will leverage this, make sure you test for it to mitigate any potential adverse impact. But also you need to understand that this contingency processing is really need to be seen as a short-term last resort contingency, because the ISO 20022 roadmap will continue to evolve. There is, it won't always be backward compatible with fin messages. And I think a lot of regulators and central banks expect that in the future they will be able to leverage the ISO rails to perhaps mandate or request additional data being included in payments. And you won't be able to do that with a fin message. So, it's really important to understand that it's a short-term solution. It's not going to be able to be leveraged for indefinitely.
Incredibly insightful. Thank you. Thank you, Nicolas. Appreciate that. Okay, as we get towards the end of this episode, I would like to end with a bit of a lightning round with you both. Hopefully a little bit of fun, some more light-hearted questions. So let's answer them quickly. So speed is the way for this one. Okay, first question, Nicolas, I'll start with you and I'll come straight to you second, Girish. True or false? ISO 20022 migration is more of an operations challenge in BAU than it is a tech one.
There's certainly a huge tech impact, but I think that's probably one of the potential pitfalls to see this as a tech challenge. So I think there's potentially more of an impact on the bank's operation processes and people, but I'm sitting on the wrong side of the fence. But my view is, this is true. It's more of an operations challenge.
Great. Girish, true, false?
I agree with Nicolas. It's more of an operation challenge.
Great. Okay. Next one. One thing that banks often forget about during migration. Nicolas, why don't you go first again?
One thing. Things will go wrong. Things will go wrong. So give yourself some margin to adjust, learn. There's dependencies on counterparts and so on. So the banks that are fully ready, they have been planning for that, or at least incorporating some of that.
Great. Girish, one thing banks often forget during migration?
So if it's one thing, then I would say doing an end-to-end thorough testing with the clients. For clients to be able to test everything that they want to in production, like lower environments, i.e. the UAT environments, so that they are really confident about what banks are doing and they are guaranteed that their payments will not be impacted post-go live.
Good answers. Okay, my final question, and Girish, I'll start with you first. What's the one myth about ISO 20022 that you'd like to bust?
So ISO 20022 is not new. It's been there almost for the last 30 years. It's primarily the European banks are the front runners to adopt ISO. It's just that everyone is starting talking about it just because it's been now rolled out for cross-border payments and for RTGs as well. As a matter of fact, for majority of the instant payments globally, ISO is already a new norm, right? So in my view, when people say that, oh, it's a new language, we have to learn everything from scratch, empty will go away, that is not really true. Nice answer.
Nicolas, we'll end with you.
I think the myth is that it ends in November 2025. In fact, 2025 is only the beginning where the industry will be using this, that new format and will be able to start capitalizing on that investment. So there is many more things to come after November 2025.
Thank you both very, very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and hope you have too. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in today. And should you have any further questions about migration, then of course you know that Swift are on hand to help. And for our clients also, please do get in touch and we'll do everything we can to support. Thank you.